Welcome to the Sanity Project podcast, the place for internet technology professionals whose work-life balance plan has imploded. We are here to provide solutions that will help the IT pro live a sane, healthy, and prosperous life. Here's your host, Joanne Victoria.
Hello, everybody. This is Joanne Victoria with another recording of the Sanity IT Project podcast. This podcast is for IT pros who want to live a sane, peaceful, prosperous, fun life. I have guests from all over the world and many categories, and today's guest is Jessica Ehrenworth. Jessica Ehrenworth is a registered psychotherapist and counselor with graduate degrees in psychology, homeopathy, and spirituality. After a decade as a therapist, today she serves as a healer, counselor, energy worker, and intuitive who helps people create soulful lives. After watching the hit-and-miss approach that often comes with traditional psychotherapy, and after having hit her own rough patch where traditional strategies were not enough, Jessica knew there must be more. Jessica realized that the way we approach conventional mental and emotional health is extremely limited and keeps most clients on an unhealthy roller coaster of crisis, which never actually heals the systems or the issues. Welcome to the show, Jessica Ehrenworth.
Thanks, Joanne. Thanks for having me here.
Well, I'm delighted that you are here, and I hope you have a good time today. I know that you said that you want to talk about how assertiveness impacts not only your emotional health, but also your spiritual health. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think when it comes to really getting to know who we are, whether that's from an emotional perspective or a spiritual perspective, all the time, they really go hand in hand. And for both, emotional and spiritual, often when we're in the spiritual paradigms, we tend to think that we have to be overly agreeing or overly nice in order to be on a spiritual path. And yes, while we bring love into everything we do on the spiritual path, there's a difference between being passive, being aggressive, and being assertive. And when we do not understand fully what the difference between those three are, we often find ourselves in often some hot water, a lot of hot water.
Yeah, I think that sometimes people think that if they're in the spiritual realm of learning or sharing or teaching, that they have to be, sycophants, that they have to just mellow out and sound bored, and they're not alive and they're not true.
Exactly. And as we learn how to love ourselves and trust ourselves and come into our own, setting assertive boundaries becomes so important, or else you cannot keep yourself in a positive state of mind. And that's the most important thing on any journey, that you wake up feeling good about yourself, where you're at, where you're going. And when we talk about the difference between passive, assertive, and aggressive, let's just go over that a little bit, if we can.
Absolutely.
For passive, often that's when we stuff our emotions down. We don't want to get into conflict. We don't want to offend anyone, so we just don't say anything at all. And what often happens when we use this strategy is that we get this bubble of anger and resentment forming deep within us. And we can only stuff our emotions down for so long. So no matter where you are on any journey, if you're stuffing things down and trying to pretend they don't exist, they will get bigger and bigger until there is nowhere for them to go and you end up exploding. not on your own time, often at the worst time possible. And then when we flip to the aggressive paradigm, when we are aggressive, and often we can be aggressive without actually realizing we are, what happens there is that we tend to use sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle manipulations to quote unquote force people into doing what we want them to do or what we sometimes feel is best for them to do. But that's not our call to make. And aggressiveness doesn't always have to be yelling, shouting, screaming at someone. Aggressiveness can have much more subtle intonations. And often we end up with passive aggressiveness, which combines, I don't want to say anything, I don't want any conflict, I don't want to yell, I just want to fly under that radar. And passive aggressiveness, you can often sense before you really understand what is going on. We call that sneaky anger, or that sneaky emotion.
Yeah, that is the worst. For me, that is kind of the worst type of person, because you're being manipulated, because talkers manipulate. No two ways about it. And when somebody is attempting to manipulate me through being passive aggressive, I just want to pound them. But what I wind up doing, I ignore that because it's painful. Then you have an interaction with the person, and they've hooked you.
Yeah, and the most difficult part about it is because it flies under the radar sometimes, we end up not trusting our own instincts because we know something's not feeling quite right, but we can't necessarily call the other person on it, or don't necessarily know how to call the other person on it. And sometimes it takes that step back and thinking to actually realize that that person's just been passive aggressive with you.
Yeah, which is a perfect manipulation tool.
Totally. And then when we get into assertiveness really is when we release and let go of those manipulation tools and factors. Because when we are using assertiveness, we don't have to be right. The other person doesn't have to be right. But we are respecting all points of view. So it's not a position of being right or wrong, but allowing each person to be heard and feel heard. And it always comes with respectful communication. So we are not trying to get anything or twist someone's arm or get someone to say yes or no. We are allowing them to have their own opinion. We don't have to agree with that opinion. And I think that's one of the myths, that if we use assertiveness, we have to agree with what the other person's saying. And the truth is, we don't have to agree, but it is not up to us to change anyone's mind. Only they can do that. And coming to terms with your belief system, the other person's belief system, and allowing each person to be exactly who they are in the conversation becomes very, very important.
So where does the assertiveness come in? Give me an example of that, because what I'm hearing you say is, we don't need to be right, and we are responsible for our point of view, but not anybody else's. So how are we being when we're in an assertive conversation, let's say one of my IT pros is at a meeting, and this is a large meeting, and everybody's different, working on different aspects of the same topic. For example, it's a project, and somebody wants to be heard, and their leader or several people in the room, since you have, no matter how, my point of view on that is, when no matter how many people are in a room, they're going to cover all aspects of the universe.
Yes.
So this is your team, this is your life, this is what happens when the world comes to an end. You're left with these people, and they bring everything of who they are and what the universe says it is. So if I want to take a stand on something, and the words may sound aggressive, but I just want to be heard, how do I act assertively in that situation in order to be heard by the naysayers, by the manipulators, by the supporters? But what am I doing to be assertive as opposed to being rude?
Right. Well, so in a situation and where actually let me just try to get a specific. Is there a specific instance that you're thinking of?
Oh, I'm just thinking of my clients having to go through, you're in a meeting, everybody is talking pretty much at the same time, and you want to be heard because your point of view is you're in charge, you're the manager of
Okay.
the team. So, but nobody's giving you the opportunity to speak. Everybody's interrupting because everybody's ego needs to be heard. So, how do you,
So
take,
at that,
go
yeah,
ahead.
at that point, asking the room to quiet down and really giving everyone the chance to be heard if there is time. So saying something like, I understand we all have different points of view. This is where I stand on this situation. I respect that your ideas may be different. Let's go through. There's times where you want to go through all of the other ideas,
Sure.
and there's times where you don't.
Right.
But letting everyone know that their ideas are important and that you're not discrediting them or not listening to them. You're hearing what each person's saying, and here are your views as well.
Okay.
So adding that in there instead of, you're wrong and I don't care about you, and really tearing people down.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
And within assertiveness, one of the most important things before you can come to that level of awareness is really having your own boundaries and being clear on where they fall as well. For boundaries, I always say it's like having your own game of life. So you get to decide the rules of your life. You get to decide what happens in your sandbox. And if other people come to play in your sandbox, you have to tell them the rules that they're playing by. And
Yes.
you have to be clear on what those rules are. And then you get the opportunity to decide whether you want these people to play in your sandbox or not. And I think the perfect demonstration of that is the McDonald's play areas,
Mm-hmm.
where you walk into the McDonald's play area and they have their rules of behavior. That's the first thing you always see when you walk in the door. It's posted very clearly. No two people on the slide. You have to wear your socks. And if you don't play by these rules, we're going to ask you to leave. And that follows suit in all aspects of life. But in order to be able to express the game you play and the rules you play by, you have to know what those rules are as well. And you have to be very clear on them. And you have to trust yourself and care about yourself enough to be able to follow through. And one of the areas where we often fall prey in that is that a lot of people fear conflict and do anything and everything to not engage in conflict. And when we shift the definition of what conflict really is, when there is conflict, it's just two people who have differing beliefs or differing ideas. And it doesn't have to get to that point of yelling, shouting, where everyone's pissed off with one another. When we work the assertive way, we can reel it in so that everyone is heard, and conflict becomes a discussion. And it's nothing more than a discussion.
Perfect. Turn conflict into a discussion. Yeah, I find that the people's egos, ego is can be a strong word, but people's need to be right seems to override most anything today,
Yes.
anywhere.
Yes.
I mean, it's not that it hasn't happened before, but with the internet, we have instant accessibility to information that we may not want to have accessibility to, but everything is thrown in one's face if one spends too much time at the computer or the phone or whatever device you use. But the conflict, people love conflict. They just love to be heard. They love to have their name shouted out there. They love to say, "Oh, you see what he did. You see what she did." But I concur that the statement turn conflict into a discussion is vital, because nothing's going to get done if we don't.
No, and when we look at some of the attributes of anger, which, anger and conflict go hand in hand, it is a powerful emotion. And when we think about what anger actually truly is, our body floods with adrenaline, which actually shuts the front part of our brain off, so we can't even think rationally. And that's why everything speeds up a lot. And when we do get angry and are involved in conflict, we need to be right, first of all, because we don't feel as if anyone's listening to us in that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
But it also creates the illusion of having power and feeling powerful. When that adrenaline rush comes on, we often feel so powerful. And anger itself, there's always an attribution of blame and a perceived misdeed. So for the emotion anger in particular, we're always blaming someone else. And it is our perception that someone is doing something, we think on purpose, to harm us. So when you do get into conflict, you want to be able to slow yourself down a lot. And that's something that, you need to work on, and start noticing that mindset shift where you are blaming everyone else and not necessarily taking responsibility or being able to think about things differently. Some of the best ideas have been born out of listening to one another. And when we think about things that way, that by listening to people and being quiet and taking everything in, often that gets some of the best creative juices flowing and births ideas that may not have come into existence fighting about it.
So what you're speaking to now, I don't think I've ever asked this question of anybody before. Is this information in your book, or is this going to be a new book after you listen to this podcast?
This information it's in two places, actually. It is in my book. The book talks a lot about boundaries. It's also I have an online course called Overcoming Difficult Emotions. And it really takes you through the process that happens when we have these difficult, or what I call hyperarousal emotions, such as anger, anxiety, stress, fear, all those emotions that hinder us in life and don't necessarily move us forward in the way we want to go.
So the name of your book is called The Assertiveness Solution, and I think we are going to provide a gift to the listeners or to the people who are looking at this and listening to this podcast on my website page on AskJoanneVictoria.com. Videos, your online course, Overcoming Difficult Emotions, which I find attractive to, because I think this is what you just covered, what you're covering now. Is what people deal with on a daily basis, and they need lessons, they need strategies to be able to handle themselves in these situations. It's not that easy when your prefrontal cortex shuts down, and you might as well be an animal in a jungle to, saving your own life, to be able to have a clear, focused conversation that makes some sense, or to listen to anybody. There's no listening.
Right. And yeah, when that prefrontal cortex breaks down, really, that's, in terms of evolution, that's the newest part of our brain. So we haven't figured out how to use it to the best of our abilities yet. And that's exactly what happens, that the back part turns on, which is our animalistic brain. And we've had that since the beginning of time. Mm-hmm. So that kicks in really easily for us.
Yeah, that's too easy. Yeah, that's a default that is too easy to access.
Exactly. And so it becomes work, or we think about it as work, to learn how to work with both our mind, body, mind, and soul, to slow everything down, especially in today's world where our nervous system is totally overstimulated. And it's not meant to be there all the time. So learning how to slow everything down and think of our emotions as our guide map instead of our worst enemy becomes really, really important and really exciting at the same time, even though it may not feel so good working through. As you work through it and notice how your emotions really become your guide map, it becomes really exciting because you become more secure in what's going on and the answers that that you get, and you trust yourself more, and your self-esteem builds as well.
Well, that can only help. So throughout your life, you've gone from being a hands-on psychotherapist to combining other strategies that would help you, which includes, the energy work and intuitive training that you have, and the fact that you're now a healer for people and coming from a different perspective. So during all of that, what has been a lesson or advice that has stuck with you?
For me, the biggest, really learning how to trust myself has been the biggest thing for me. You'll hear me say a lot, you either believe that the world has your back or it doesn't. And when I start working with clients, we start doing exercises, and they quickly realize that the world is a fun place to live, and you can actually play games and notice that the world really does have your back. The world wants you to do as well as you want to do. And the quicker you start realizing that and garnering the trust in what the world is offering you and yourself, the quicker life really starts to shift.
Okay, so it is the world that wants you to do the best. The world wants you to be what you were put on this earth for, is more or less what you're saying. Am I correct in that deduction?
Yeah, it's kind of similar to walking into a meeting or an interview where you're being interviewed by a whole board of people. Those people, even though you might not think they're there for you, they want you to do your best. Interviews that don't go the way they want, or don't go as well as you would hope, are very painful to sit through.
Yes.
And life is no different. The world wants to bring out the best in you. You want to bring out the best in you. Otherwise, it's very painful. And learning how to do that and trusting that you are on that right path is the beginning of everything.
Well, that says it all, in my opinion. Thank you. I want people to hear this in case they're not reading it, so I want to use all aspects of how people function. Jessica Ehrenworth's website link is brainhealthyclinic.com, spelled just the way you think it should be. Let's see. Her email address is Jessica. That's Jessica at Jessica Ehrenworth, EHRENWORTH.com. And as I say, listen to this podcast. Tell other people to listen to this podcast. If you see it somewhere on Twitter, retweet it. If you see it somewhere on Facebook, share it. People need to hear this information because Jessica has put it in such a way that is not only understandable, but is duplicatable. How's that for a strange little word? Listeners can also go to my website at askjoannevictoria.com and download a free copy of the True Self Handbook, a guide to transform your life. When you do that, you will also be signed up for my email newsletter. It's very brief because people don't want to read that much anymore, so I keep it as brief as I can and make my points hopefully clearly. Jessica Ehrenworth, I appreciate you being here today. The time has gone by much too quickly because you are filled with great information, and I'm glad that you're here and our listeners got to listen to you. Take care and have a great day. Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sanity Project podcast. Please go to AskJoanneVictoria.com and continue the conversation on her podcast page. And get a free copy of her book, The True Self Handbook, a guide to transform your life. That's AskJoanneVictoria.com. Take care, and thanks for being here.